Hello friends! Welcome to the Lair of OmnusI for today, the 7th day of RPGaDay, this being the 7th day of August. The day's topic is couple. Alright. Again, trying to match this up to my game as much as I can. Today's idea is that as far as couple goes, there's generally a dichotomy between the different experiences in a role-playing game that I'm trying to wrestle with. And I know at least one person out there really doesn't like my system because it's focused on dice, and they favor narrative systems. But quite honestly, I don't think that one decries the other. Dice in my game system, and honestly in almost any game system, can be used as frequently or as seldom as you wish, with very few exceptions to that. For instance, if you wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons and you wanted to roll the dice as little as possible, then as a dungeon master, being the game master of the game, you might call for rolls very, very seldomly. Instead, for instance, taking a look at the character's basic statistics, say add 10 plus their usual bonuses they would get to a skill as kind of a default for anything they might try to do. So if they want to scramble up a steep incline, you can note their athletic skill, add 10 to the bonus they would get to athletics, and then grade the object they're trying to clamber over. If it's difficult, they might need a bigger number. If it's not that hard, even a relatively simple thing might succeed. And if the players think of some clever way of doing it, say they have a stick to lean on and propel themselves up the hill, that may give them a bonus, and you wouldn't have to roll on that. You could basically do it like we used to do in the old days and just say, yeah, you had a good idea, go ahead, it works, and just go with it. No dice roll required. If you have a character who is attacking a person who is not aware of them, and they describe how they move up and attack, how they're attacking, you might decide that no dice roll is necessary. Just say, wow, okay, you hit. What's the most damage that you can do? Because you clearly are in a position to hit them at your best shot that they can't defend against. And that's perfectly fine in the game. Now, obviously, after that, their mechanics, the books are thick with mechanics because that's the kind of simulation game that there is. Dicefoil doesn't really have that. There's more abstraction to that. But the dice are there for people who want to simulate cinematic reality. They want people to be able to all have turns in doing things and help to tell the story both on the ideas of the characters and what they say and do, but also based on how the players choose for their characters to do the things, how they do them, and sometimes why they do them. These are things that I find are very, very useful in a role-playing game for telling the story and making it gripping and engaging. Now, it just so happens that my mechanics have some things cooked into them, like an appeal to the dramatic and a sense of proportion. For instance, not everything that you do might take your greatest effort, in which case, if you're reserving yourself to do something else in the game, you can certainly do that using the mechanics of the system. But again, if you are the game master and you want to use those mechanics seldomly, that's perfectly fine. That is basically every game master's prerogative. But I'm interested in, if people who are interested in using those kind of mechanics are there, my mechanics will be there and available for them. In that case, I do have a couple of narrative elements that really aren't fitting to the reality of the game to kind of help to push the story along. One of them I'm trying to think of a better name because I'm not completely satisfied with this name, but pity dice. If somebody's trying to do something, and it's really important for them that they do it, sometimes the dice are not your friend. They will go cold. They will be spiteful, vengeful pieces of plastic that only want to see you fail. In which case, if somebody else is there and they still have some potential, they might loan somebody a die up to the level of their skill or aptitude to get another bite at the apple, because darn it, it's so cool if they would succeed, or they tried. Now this would only happen if the player really put some effort into narrating what they did. So if, for instance, in a situation where one of the heroes, swordsman, in a big fight against, say, the evil sheriff of the area who's been oppressing people, and the swordsman has had a great speech at the beginning of the battle against the evil sheriff, and it let him know that he is justice and he has come to make a redress for all of the misdeeds that the sheriff has done. And he steps up and immediately rolls all ones. Even though he did a great shot, he tried his best, everything should have been cool, he missed. And in that case, two things. Number one, the story weaver, that's the name of the game master in my game, the story weaver could float them a circumstance die. If they set everything up, they can get a bonus to catch themselves again, but sometimes that would even fail. So somebody else, overcome by the drama of the moment and seeing just how unfortunate that is, can float them a die from their available dice pool and try to pick them up. Give them at least a chance to not come off totally poorly. To be able to get a pity die, you have to have used your best die available for that roll. And it's, again, just a safe measure for when the cosmos absolutely hates you. Somebody else can take pity on you. Circumstance dice themselves are also a level of cinematic storytelling. But a lot more does depend on the circumstances that you wish to set up. For instance, if you insist that you are attacking with your back to the sun against a foe, and you are moving to higher elevation to strike down at them, that's a circumstance that may change the course of the combat. And for somebody who thinks of those things and takes advantage of the circumstances at hand, they should get a bonus in my mind. And the game does celebrate that by giving a bonus die for clever play. Again, if you work at coming up with a satisfactory solution, I'm okay with giving you bonuses and increasing your chances of having a good result when you're all done. So, that's certainly an element in my game. Now, I never wanted my game to be completely narrative. I do like some elements of simulation. I like being able to resolve the question of, does this happen, and have a mechanic in place for that. So I'm not a champion of complete and total agency of all players. I believe that the game master directing the story has to, have a world and a framework to it. But after that, I always find that narrative comes where you want it. And if you work hard at telling the story and not always opening things up to the dice, despite the fact the game is called Dice File, there's plenty of options for interpretation of the scenario, and sometimes even sacrificing a little bit off of the top of realism in order to tell a good story. So that is a dynamism that every game master and basically every group eventually wrestles the exact point that they're comfortable with. I myself like something in between. My taste drift a little bit more towards narrative, but that is largely because, quite honestly, in my experience, combat and strict adherence to simulation slows the game down. And realistically, I rarely find that it's necessary or helpful to slow the game down to a crawl just because you're trying to accomplish some level of verisimilitude between your game and real life. Especially silly when you have a game where there are dragons and magic. Your games are generally, and I find at least, the ones that I respond the best to are ones that have some conscious effort to simulate movie life. That is, the heroes don't get sick. The heroes, through the story, maybe in between movies they might get sick, but while they're there, they're at their best until the moment they're cut down. Their hit points or whatever is basically a measurement of how badly the story needs them to be alive and functioning for the story to continue. When you run out of hit points, that's basically, you're fine up till the point you're hit with a blow that takes you down. There are games, and as a matter of fact, I saw a thread where somebody was complaining about a death spiral. That is, wounds debilitate you and make you less effective, so you have a better chance of taking another wound that makes you even less effective until the point that you're down on the ground. Most people would look at getting injured as being a good indication that it might be a good idea to get out of that scenario. Things are dangerous, and unless you really have to sit and fight, you don't want to continue. That's more realistic. Certainly, if I break my arm, which happily I've never done, but if I broke my arm, it's a good indicator for me that I should sit down and stop doing whatever caused me to break that arm. And if it's some ridiculous thing that I'm doing, I should stop doing that. And if it's a dangerous thing that breaks my arm, I should get away from that dangerous situation as fast as possible. If you're playing a zany game where the heroes are always super heroic and never run away, that doesn't seem to fit. That's why I abstract games like hit point systems, because they work for that kind of logic. You're always in the fight until you're dying, so might as well keep at it. Then you have to be judicious on your own. How few hit points means you could be one blow from going down. It's always a question. And games that have critical hits and things like that always blur those numbers and make it a little bit more tense when you find yourself in a bad way in a mortal fight with something. So that couple of viewpoints that are battling are something that most games do tackle, unless you go all the way on one side or all the way on the other side. For instance, GURPS, a game I do like, does have rules to simulate almost everything. Everything. Magic, superheroes, psionics, falling damage, nuclear weapon damage, all range of guns and firepower, swords, and almost anything you can come up with. There's a rule for that. Weapons getting stuck in opponents. There's a rule for that. Critical hits aiming for anywhere, including the eyes, if you're that good. Bypassing the hardness of the skull, bypassing any armor. If you aim for the eye slits of a person's armor, it's almost guaranteed to be a one-shot takedown or kill with the right weapon, certainly. That's possible in the game, although there's a huge penalty, but if you are that amazing, you can pull that off. So, that goes too far. I use a more streamlined version, something that's more what you would find in the Dungeon Fantasy box set. Not using every single rule from GURPS for realism. Cutting off some things, adjusting in hit points to adjust for a more cinematic realism that I like a bit more. Now, if you go completely the other way and you take away almost all simulation mechanics, you've got something like Fate, where your numbers really don't matter, you have more vague aspects which modify things. And then you break out your Fate dice and you've got pluses and minuses to see how some events roll out. Very, very loose, very, very open to interpretation, and that is, story is all. The players add in aspects and change the scenes using fate points to the advantage of their characters for what they're trying to do, or sometimes just to tell a better story. And that's cool in its own way. That's too pure narrative for me, not enough simulation for my style, and I acknowledge that. It was kind of a challenge for me to actually give some critical advice in a Fate book that I helped at, and I'd like to give a shout out to Megan Bennett Burke. She's awesome, and she's a great writer, and it was a pleasure to work with her. Her book that I kind of took a look at was called Leaves of Chiaroscuro. It's very good. Highly recommend it. It's from a great slice of historical fiction. Fantastic. But I got to read through Fate and try to understand it, and when I did, I just kind of understood it's not my thing, but I know a lot of people really like it, and that's cool. Those people aren't going to like Dice File, and I'm afraid that's just the way it is. My innovations for the game and a lot of the elements that I have in the game could, in their own way, kind of mirror the aspects and circumstances of fate with a die representing that. Either a hindering die or a die added because of circumstance. That's fine. But for the most part, my game is a bit more simulationist. But I find that narrative works depending on the directives of the game master and to some extent how the players roll as well. But there's so much room out there for different role-playing games, and everybody I talk to on social media, I swear, has got a game in development they're working on. Everybody seems to. It's great. Most will never get anywhere, but it's still cool to have that dream burning. And that's where I've been, quite honestly. So, yeah, once these two elements, these couple of directives that push role-playing games out, are settled for a group, that means that you can have a serious talk about what's the best game for your group. And I hope that if you like the idea of a couple of dice rolls where the dice are representing everything that's a factor in whatever you're trying to do to resolve things, hey, I hope that you're interested in a game and that mine is one that you might look at. So, at least when I get it finished. So, thank you very much for joining me. I am Rob. This was my RPGaDay offering, and I'll see you tomorrow with my next video. Thank you, and farewell.